is Dr. Varun Deshmukh, and in this lecture we are going to discuss about various type of shocks. I see many doctors in the ICU get confused at the steps of diagnosing or treating the shock. So in this session we will make it as simple as possible for you. We will discuss various aspects in the following headings: the definition of shock, the clinical manifestation of shock, the types of shocks, and how to approach shock. So first of all, the definition of shock. So shock is a state where there is an imbalance between oxygen demand and oxygen supply. So either there is increase in the oxygen demand at tissue level, or there is decrease in the oxygen supply, which eventually leads to tissue dysfunction. So what are the manifestations of the shock? So clinically, if you see, the patient may be having altered mental status, cold, clammy peripheries, decreased capillary refill time, diaphoresis, decrease in the urine output. These are the common findings. If you look at the blood pressure, if the mean arterial blood pressure is less than 70, in general this would mean that the patient has hypotension and it is similar to shock. If a patient is hypertensive and there is a drop of more than 40 mm of mercury in systolic or diastolic BP, indirectly that also means that there is a significant drop in the blood pressure and this patient is also in shock. If you can observe the patient for longer, decrease in the urine output less than 0.5 ml per kg per hour also indicates shock. If we do an ABG, elevated lactate more than 2 millimole per liter also indicates that the patient is in shock. So these are the various manifestations. Now coming to various types of shock. So broadly, shock can be divided into 4 types: hypovolemic shock, cardiogenic shock, obstructive, and distributive shock. As the name itself suggests, hypovolemic shock means there is loss of volume, blood volume. So it can be either poor intake or loss of fluids from upper or lower GI tract. In a perioperative setting, there can be bleeding. Sometimes in a trauma setting, there can be external or internal bleeding. So these are all causes of loss of blood volume in various forms, leading to hypovolemic shock. Cardiogenic shock is also pretty clear by its name itself. Because of the dysfunction of the left ventricle, the cardiac output gets compromised and the peripheral circulation gets compromised. So that generally in a myocardial infarction, this type of shock would present. Obstructive shock means there is an obstruction to the blood flow flowing either just before or at the level of heart. So the example include tension pneumothorax, which will lead to obstruction in the inflow and to some extent outflow. Other example include pulmonary embolism, where there is obstruction in the pulmonary circulation leading to decrease in cardiac output. The third example would be cardiac tamponade, when there is an increased pressure in the pericardial space, which leads to collapse of the right side of the heart and eventually leading to impaired filling and progressively impaired cardiac output. So these are the examples of obstructive shock. And the fourth and last is distributive shock, where there is a vasomotor dysfunction leading to vasodilatation, leading to increased venous capacitance and eventually hypotension. At the same time, if you see the pulse would be bounding, the pulse pressure would be wide, periphery may be warm. So in all other shocks that we discussed, cardiogenic, hypovolemic and obstructive, the periphery would be cold. Compared to that, the distributive shock will have a warm periphery. Examples of distributive shock includes septic shock, the most common one. Apart from that, anaphylactic shock, endocrine shock like Addisonian crisis or myxedema, heavy metal poisoning, spinal shock or neurotrauma related shock, where there is a loss of vasomotor tone. So these are the common examples of distributive shock. Now in all 3 shocks, cardiogenic, hypovolemic and obstructive, there will be cold periphery and increased heart rate. At the same time, there may be drop in the blood pressure also. But in cardiogenic shock, along with these findings, there will be bilateral crepitation, pink frothy sputum, rise in the JVP and bilateral and X-ray suggestive of pulmonary edema. So it will differentiate itself from the other 2 type of shocks. Compared to the distributive shock we have discussed, it is a warm shock and there is a wide pulse. So now we will discuss the approach towards the patient who is in shock. So first of all, we need to identify that the patient is in shock. So we have already discussed the clinical manifestations and different type of shocks. So based on that, you should suspect that the patient is in shock. Now we will see various clinical scenarios and which type of shocks can be present in these scenarios. So from critical care point of view, any medical ICU patient can suffer from either type of shocks, but predominantly the most common shocks that we observe is hypovolemic shock, septic shock, and sometimes cardiogenic shock. When a patient is on ventilator, these type of patients suffer from hypovolemic or obstructive shock more often. When a patient is given sedatives before being intubated, the vasomotor tone is lost, and when the tube is put and patient is started on a ventilator, because of the positive pressure ventilation, the intrathoracic pressure rises, which leads to impairment of the venous return and eventually reduction in the cardiac output. So often we notice that the initiation of ventilator leads to a significant drop in blood pressure. So this is a relative hypovolemia. Because of the increase in venous capacitance, the blood volume has redistributed. So immediately we should give fluids and this shock should revert. This thing is the patient may have barotrauma related pneumothorax or something, and the patient might manifest as a obstructive shock. When a patient has a cardiac background, like a post-cardiac surgery case, there is a possibility of a new MI, and which may lead to cardiogenic shock. If the drain is blocked and there is collection in the pericardial space, this can lead to cardiac tamponade, leading to obstructive shock. In a cardiology case, post-angiography and angioplasty, sometimes we see there is injury to a coronary, which leads to filling up of pericardial space with blood and eventually creating cardiac tamponade. Or in all the cardiac background cases, there is always a possibility of new onset MI. So this has to be kept in mind. In perioperative settings, the most common shock that we see is hypovolemic shock, maybe because of the loss of fluid or inadequate resuscitation, and sometimes loss of blood. The other important is septic shock, where there is a translocation of gut bacteria or a surgical site infection. The third possibility is obstructive shock secondary to pulmonary embolism, which can happen in a perioperative setting, DVT and pulmonary embolism. Now we will discuss how to assess the shock and how to approach it. So our goal is to eventually improve cardiac output. So whatever interventions we do, we have to eventually improve the left ventricular output. So improvement in the blood pressure or improvement in the urine output or improvement in the CVP, these are all indirect measures. So if you have access to a cardiac output monitor, that is the best or the gold standard based on which you can tell whether the patient is responding to your intervention. So that is the most important thing. Now what will you do? So you will examine clinically, as we discussed. You will check the ABG and check the lactate levels and see whether the lactates are elevated. You will use a point of care ultrasound, so which will guide you differentiate between the various type of shocks. With point of care ultrasound, you can diagnose pneumothorax, you can diagnose pericardial effusion and tamponade, you can diagnose hemoperitoneum, means indirectly you can diagnose free fluid in the peritoneal cavity, which may hint towards hemoperitoneum, and you can also check the IVC collapsibility. Now IVC collapsibility is something which we use very often in our day-to-day practice. So I would like to share a few more points about IVC collapsibility. Whenever you check the IVC, the patient has to be in a supine position, not in a propped up position. There are two various components, IVC collapsibility and IVC distensibility. For ventilated patients who are deeply sedated or paralyzed, IVC distensibility has to be used. The formula is maximum diameter minus minimum diameter divided by mean diameter, and the cutoff is 18 to 20%. If distensibility is more than 18 to 20%, that means the patient is fluid responsive, and that means giving fluids will help the patient improve his cardiac output. IVC collapsibility is used for conscious and spontaneously breathing patient. Here the formula is maximum diameter minus minimum diameter divided by maximum diameter, and the cutoff is 50%. IVC distensibility is much more validated than the collapsibility. So that's why perhaps the cutoff is higher. Always remember that the patients on pressure support or non-invasive ventilator, we should not check the collapsibility. We should detach the ventilator for a few seconds and assess the collapsibility, because the positive pressure, which is a pressure in the form of pressure support or NIV, the tidal volume can vary, and the changes in the IVC diameter will become more pronounced with variation in the tidal volume. So you may not get the actual volume status. So that's about IVC. Other thing is CVP or pulmonary artery diastolic pressure. So these are also important tools, and you should always remember that a low CVP or low PA diastolic pressure definitely indicate that this patient is fluid responsive. Now, a very important thing to know is when the patient is fluid responsive does not mean that the patient is in shock. So in a normal patient also, normal person also, the CVP value is 0 to 5. So what it simply means is when you give volume to this patient with low CVP, his left ventricle will generate more left ventricle output. So his left ventricle is responsive to the fluid challenge. That's the only meaning. When the CVP or IVC collapsibility is used in the context of shock, in that scenario, giving fluid will help the patient recover from shock. But in a euvolemic patient also, this is very important to know, in euvolemic patient also, the IVC will be collapsible and the CVP will be 0 to 5. So all patients with normal IVC collapsibility or a normal value of CVP, we need not start aggressively hydrating them. When there are manifestations of shock, then only we should hydrate them. Or so in the context of shock, we have to see these IVC or CVP or PA diastolic, these things. The CVP and PA diastolic low values definitely indicate fluid responsiveness. Normal or high value have a lot of confounding factors. So you should be aware about those, and that's why normal or high CVP or normal or high PA diastolic pressure are generally to be taken with a pinch of salt. Another tool which is not very often used in the clinical practice is SCVO2. So if your patient has a central line, you can do an ABG from the distal port and monitor the SO2 in that ABG. If the SO2 is less than 65, this indicates a cardiogenic or a hypovolemic sort of a shock. And if the SCVO2 is more than 70, it indicates the presence of septic shock. So SCVO2 is also a good tool, and you can repeat it after say 8 or 10 or 12 hours to know the response of your therapy. Another tool that we have is pulse pressure or stroke volume variation, which is often present in the monitor itself. So to use this tool, you need to be aware of the limitation of this tool. So when the patient is having a sinus rhythm, patient is on ventilator, deeply sedated or paralyzed, and tidal volume of around 8 to 10 ml per kg, respiratory rate not very high. In these patients, probably pulse pressure variation will give you some accurate results. So PPV of more than 14% is generally this means that the patient is fluid responsive, and you would give fluid. Now other thing is doing a 2D echo and doing a passive leg raise test to document whether the patient has improvement in cardiac output. So this we are not able to perform frequently in our setup, but this is also one option that you have. Now coming to the approach, whenever you get a patient whom you diagnose to be in shock, think about the scenario, think about what type of shock this can be, and apply your various findings and try to come to a conclusion. So any patient who is in shock, most important thing, first step to do is to give a fluid challenge. Irrespective of the type of shock, giving a 200 or 300 ml of fluid challenge is not going to harm your patient, but in most of the scenario it is going to help your patient. Until you come to a conclusion, it may take 5 or 10 or 15 minutes. By that time you would have given a small bolus, and you would already have seen improvement in the cardiac output or improvement in the blood pressure, which is indirectly indicator of the improvement in cardiac output. So fluid challenge is the first step. Once you confirm that the patient is patient's volume status is full, then in that case you may have to add vasopressors. Noradrenaline is the first choice of vasopressor that we use. If the patient has a bradycardia, then you may use dopamine instead of noradrenaline. When the norad or dopa goes into a moderate dose, then in that case you may add vasopressin to improve the blood pressure and improve the shock. So this is about shock. The final advice that I would like to give you is to not rely on a single parameter to come to a conclusion. So always use your clinical judgment, use your ultrasound findings, use your other parameters, and then come to a conclusion, rather than following only IVC or only PPV or only CVP. Just don't rely upon single parameter. So use all the parameters, make a holistic picture, apply it to your clinical scenario, and then you will come to conclusion, and you can most of the times you will be right. Okay, so another thing important thing to know is always keep on reassessing your patient who is in shock. So you may have come to a conclusion that this patient is having this certain type of shock. Always after half an hour, 1 hour, come back and see if your diagnosis is correct, if the patient's recovery is on the right track, if you need to re-evaluate or reassess, and be open-minded to change your diagnosis. So I think that concludes our session on shock. If you like the video, please like and subscribe to my channel. If you want any more videos, if you have any specific suggestions, please write down in the comment section, and I will try to bring those topics in the upcoming videos. Thank you for visiting my channel and seeing this video. That's all from my side. Goodbye.